my Pokemon cards are here.
Man, this box kinda heavy.
Oh, it's just my prismatic Evo cards. Thank you. Have a good day.
I don't know, man. Kinda weird, but okay, bye.
Okay, we'll just open the box. It's fine.
You can't possibly like
Of
Pokemon
course.
cards.
I should have known. How did you all fit in there? Where are my cards? Okay, I've made a lot of many videos. Are they still in there?
Let
me just put it this way. You guys, if you don't leave, I'm calling the police.
Unlike me, I had a first edition base.
Okay, that's enough. Get out. You're all done. Get out. Get out of here. Goodbye. Leave.
Gerald back in 5th grade.
You used to be able to get my ET.
Wait, what was I doing again? Hi there, my name's Vanilla. You know that, I know that. Unless you don't, and now you do. So you might be looking at me, think, oh, I look a little weird, talk a little funny. I mean, did you see the thumbnail? It's okay, get it out of your system. I kind of debated how to start this video, but I think the best place is for me to explain what this video isn't going to be and why I decided to make it to begin with. I'm going to be giving you a bit of trivial history about the Pokemon trading card game in the early days, especially in Japan. And then I'll move on to the games that were made for the Game Boy Color. There's not going to be any discussion about the price of cards or anything like that. There are plenty of videos that talk about those kinds of things. There's more to the TCG than the price of cards, and I wanted to contribute to that part of the discussion. When I say history, you might feel a bit offended. Even though it may only feel like a short period of time, Gen 1 released almost 3 decades ago. I think a lot of information is liable to get lost to time if someone doesn't compile bits and pieces of it and tell the story as it is now. Obviously, I'm not talking about the games and other digital media which are freely circulated on the internet. I'm talking about stuff that is physically released that can't be preserved by the Wayback Machine or is unlikely to be uploaded to the Internet Archive. It's more like books and magazines that are collecting dust in people's childhood homes. The information in the books aren't going to be anything monumental, but as you'll see in this video, there's still valuable stuff that many of us don't even know about. A lot of the time, it's trivial things that really show the true development and character of a subject. That was pretty profound, huh? Bet you weren't expecting that. I went through the long process of finding some interesting things about the TCG that probably haven't seen the light of day in a long time. And I tried to pick out some of the most obscure things to talk about. This isn't going to be your typical history video. Hopefully you find it much more interesting. And I just want to say this really quickly because I want to get to the fun stuff as soon as possible, but it takes a lot of time and effort to make these videos. So if you find the stuff I'm talking about entertaining, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel. Your support helps me so much. If you have seen some of my other videos, you'll know the story. I like older tech and yapping. It may hurt a little bit to hear me talking about tech from the 90s and calling it old, but I wasn't around then. Not even conceptualized. But don't be a weenie and assume I don't know what I'm talking about. That's lame. Go touch grass, Grandpa. I'm not looking at any of this through a nostalgic lens, but rather as someone who's doing some research into stuff that interests them. Recently, I've started a slow and painful process of acquiring some resources of my own, like books and stuff. Who would have thought that books from the 90s would be getting shipped all the way from Japan to Freedom Land? You see 6 books and you go, yeah, I want to buy that. Seems cool to me and the price is really reasonable. But then it's a week later, and your books arrive at the third-party vendor, and they slap you with a $60 estimate for shipping. You realize that's a lot more than what you paid for the books, so you have to humbly select the 2-week shipping option because you enjoy being able to buy food. Understandably, when you're sending an 11-pound package a gajillion miles across the ocean, you gotta pay a lot more for shipping. But now your plan to look for information for your video in these books is not an option anymore. So what do? You go to Old Reliable, also known as Google. Now you may be asking,
What kind of sources are on Google?
I think to get started, we should talk about the different qualities that these kinds of sources come in. There are different qualities for uploads, and they range from pristine to authentic. And so when you look at sources in places like the Internet Archive, there may even be information on what machine was used to scan the content. And the quality is so good, you might not have even known it was originally a physical book or newspaper. Then we have to look at the somewhat more accessible options for the average uploader, which would be using a phone to take pictures. In the case of my research on Space World 97 in my last video, you can spot fingers in some photos. I had to Photoshop them out, but that's a small price to pay. It's literally free. The archive is free, not Photoshop. I'd like to be able to purchase these sources for myself so I can own it, but given how I'm not made of money, that's just not possible. The aftermarket for some of this stuff is insane for no reason. This edition of Korokoro is a great example. $120 US. I almost died when I saw that. The prices of a lot of these magazines are inflated because they used to come with Pokemon cards. With the prices being so jacked up, I had to use sources that I had access to. I started my search in the places that I knew best, which were Japanese magazines like CoroCoro and Famimaga 64. Famimaga 64 and its predecessor have been uploaded onto the Internet Archive, but that publication pretty much strictly talked about video games, so CoroCoro was my next stop, since it covers toys and other products related to series featured in their magazine. Unfortunately, uploads of CoroCoro don't really exist in their entirety, so we'll be looking at some photos of the magazines uploaded by Sero on Zoidland. I have to say I'm super grateful that they took the time to put the books up on a little stand and take the photos of the pages that way, because I'm still having flashbacks to the fingers from the Internet Archive. The best place to start when looking at CoroCoro would probably be the November 1996 issue. I'm not saying that this is the first publication of information about the TCG, I don't know where to find that. But the first actual TCG expansion was released in Japan on October 20th, 1996, and this magazine was released in November of 1996. So I'd say we're close enough, but we're not going to look at the TCG news first, we need to look at something else. You see this? This is the second most influential character I've ever seen in my life. This is Pencil Man. Yeah, that's actually his name. He is an icon, and I spent a lot more time than I should have trying to find information about him. Google Lens didn't turn anything up, and then I tried looking up the event where he was supposedly at. I couldn't find anything about the event. Is that kind of creepy? Since I was unsuccessful in my search, all we have are these few pictures, and now he will be memorialized in this video. Pencil Man was kind of like a mascot for battle pencils. I don't know if he was actually a mascot. I also didn't know what battle pencils were. Apparently they're like dice, and in the case of Pokemon battle pencils, since there are other kinds of battle pencils, they have moves and stats and stuff on each of the sides of the pencil. I may have also ordered some of those. But look, see how cool? They're kind of like cards, but pencils. Now, when we look at the page that actually talks about the TCG, the thing that caught my eye was this. Look, did you ever want to know how Pokemon cards are made? Well, forget everything you may have seen, because this is the Pokemon machine. The Pokemon machine is run by this guy. I don't really know what he's doing, maybe checking to see if everything is in compliance with OSHA standards. Actually, there are a lot of little guys here. Man, this factory is busy. They're struggling, and I'm kind of worried about the one stuck on the conveyor belt. Does the one driving the forklift have a license? Given the disorganization displayed here, I'm not sure if this is the process used to make cards anymore, but it's at least what it used to look like. Man, what a cool piece of history. Seriously, getting to the actual TCG, on the other side of the page we can see suggestions for cards to use in your deck. Red suggestions are for a power build, and oak suggestions revolve around speed. That's something I noticed with many of these sources. They went really in depth on how to play the TCG. And honestly, even though they're made for kids, the directions and tips are insanely thorough. The really in-depth tutorials were in these supplementary magazines called Pokemon Card Fan Club and Pokemon Trainer Magazine. The Trainer Magazine turned out to be the more popular of the two, or at least that's what I'm assuming since it had a lot more publications. It also happens to be my personal favorite. That's because it's where I was introduced to this icon. This is Dr. Oyama. Now, just looking at him, you can already tell how amazing he is. I mean, look at the power pose. You might be wondering how you can recreate his look and become like Dr. Oyama. Here we can see what he has going on that we don't. We learn that the card on top of his head is a Jumbo US Edition Charizard. What's in his right pocket? He doesn't even know. He wears toe socks, which the magazine notes is kinda creepy, but they don't know what they're talking about. In his chest pocket is a card deck, obviously. It only contains energy cards. What a cutting edge strat. And then finally, in his right pocket is a book. It happens to be Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've never personally read it, but it seems like a lighthearted, easy read. It took me a little bit, but I finally realized that Dr. Oyama is Dr. Mason from the trading card game for the Game Boy Color. I have to say his IRL counterpart is a lot more interesting. Like, look at this art. Does this convey the hero that is Dr. Oyama? No, absolutely not. I know we've all become so attached to Dr. Oyama, but we have to move on to the American media. American coverage of the TCG was pretty bleak. I struggled to find sources since the TCG itself isn't a video game. There was one issue of The Duelist that covered Pokemon cards. The Duelist was Wizards of the Coast's magazine, and Wizards of the Coast, who also publishes Magic the Gathering, was the publisher of Pokemon cards in the US until 2003. The Pokemon article honestly reads as really tone deaf because you can see here that they're saying Pikachu is as recognizable as Hello Kitty and Mickey Mouse in Japan. I mean, Hello Kitty, I guess, Sanrio was a very well-established brand in Japan even at this time, but you know for a fact that's not why they chose Hello Kitty. It's almost for sure that's the only brand that Americans would have recognized at the time. This spread is also the prime example of a wall of text. Like, I don't want to read any of this, so we won't. It's all instructions on how to play the TCG anyway, and thankfully I already know how to do that. Lackluster coverage was also the case with Nintendo Power. There wasn't much in the way of information about the TCG. I found plenty of advertisements about buying the cards, but nothing really about the cards themselves. It looks like that this insert would have been the first introduction to the TCG and Nintendo Power. I think this is where we can see an explanation on how it's like Magic the Gathering, but easier. They also show the different parts of the cards and what types of cards there are. That's cool and everything, but there is no American source that can match the hype that the TCG had in Japan. I mean, even if you don't speak Japanese, you can't tell me the visuals in these magazines aren't top tier. That's been pretty typical in my experience. A lot of effort goes into these particular Japanese magazine spreads. Whether that's silly jokes or funny pictures, it's all really engaging. For example, let's look at this Japanese guidebook compared to the English guidebook made by Prima. I own a ton of physical Prima guides, so I really enjoy them, but you can't even argue with this. I suppose you can, but I'm not listening. Look at these pictures, they're actually amazing. Prima, get out of here with all the words, like history of trading cards, really? I don't care.
People have been playing card games with decks of cards for more than 600 years.
This does not need to be here. A picture could go here instead. Boom, much more interesting. Oh, and here we go, more history.
Cigarette manufacturers used to put cards with pictures on them inside their cartons. Kids started to collect them.
Guys, maybe we should...
The makers soon figured out where their real market for collector cards was.
Guys, maybe we should leave out the part where cigarettes were marketed towards children.
And then they started packaging them with more kid-friendly products.
It's too late. You're not fooling anyone. We all know that's not how that happened. Look it up. Again though, too many words and false information. Boring. Next. Now that we're all on the same page about the hype that was surrounding the TCG, it makes sense that the game would have been turned into a portable digital format. No, I'm not talking about Trading Card Live or Pocket. We're talking about the Pokemon trading card game. Yeah, I don't know whose decision it was to name it that way, but in Japan, it's Pokemon Trading Card Game GB, which makes a lot more sense. So I'm gonna call it TCG GB because otherwise I'm gonna get confused. We can look at the reviews from Nintendo Power because that's a favorite pastime of mine. It also gives us an idea of what underqualified critics were publishing in a magazine. I just want to point out that this review is really short. The reviewers were a bit more upset than I honestly think they should have been. They were really salty that there weren't a lot of RPG elements. I'm not entirely sure what they were expecting, but when I think of a TCG game for the Game Boy Color, I'm not thinking of an RPG. There is a story, you have to go fight your way to the Grandmasters in order to get the legendary cards, cause you want to prove that you're the best. That's not really much different than the Gen 1 story, where you go to become the champion cause you want to prove you're the best trainer there ever was. They're also really salty about the graphics, and I'm not entirely sure why. Like a 7? That's like a 5 by Nintendo Power standards. Their rating system is unnecessarily arbitrary. The only comment for the music is, if you need happy music to play cards, TCG's peppy tunes will pick you up. Boom, 7 out of 10. Why? Is it because it's forgettable? I guess that's what I'm gonna go with. But by that standard, I think it's kind of unfair that they gave the original such a low score for the art, because I was really impressed with the sprite work on the cards. Like, it's actually kind of insulting to the sprite artists. To get that level of detail and sprite work is really impressive, and it looks amazing even now. So, I'm gonna share 2 secrets with you. 1, I have never played this game before, and 2, I honestly still haven't played the original. Instead, I started by playing the TCG Generations ROM hack that was made by Paperfire 88. Not only keeping all the cards from the original Gen 1 expansions, Paperfire has added in a ton of cards with Pokemon from many different generations, accompanied by their own unique sprite work, which all look amazing, I'd like to add. And honestly, I'm super happy I played this version because it added a lot of depth to the game. I liked having so many different cards to choose from. Obviously, since I don't play competitive, I don't know much about the intricacies of the card game, so I can't really talk about difficulty, but according to the changes in the text file, there have been some adjustments from the original. All of the NPC decks have been modified to be more cohesive. Apparently, the trainer AI has also been tweaked a bit to use attacks more instead of status moves. I was personally able to run through a good portion of the game using the default grass deck, so do with that information what you will, but it was cool to have a bunch of cards to choose from and play against. The story is the same no matter which version of the game you play, and honestly, I don't think this game needs much more of a story than it already has. It knows what it is, and that's a card game. And it's a pretty good one at that.
Oh, Vanilla, everybody knows about the TCG game for the Game Boy.
Okay, maybe that's true, but many of you probably aren't too familiar with the sequel to this game. And that's because TCG GB2, or TCG GR as it's also called, was only released in Japan. But you can play it now thanks to a translation patch made by Artemis 251. This game, I have a lot and very little to say all at the same time. This game made me angry. There is something wrong with the RNG, and it gets very irritating very quickly. The coin toss is one good example of the RNG being terrible. It determines what you're going to get on your next flip based on your last flip. This means even if you were to save state before a flip, it's not going to do anything to reload because it's already determined the outcome after your last flip. I know what it sounds like, but it genuinely feels intentionally rigged. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's just more than predetermining the outcome after your flip. I don't have any evidence yet. I almost feel slighted enough to go dig through the disassembly and see if I'm right. And maybe as I'm editing this video, my hatred will fester. But the amount of times I would get heads when I needed tails or vice versa, compared to all the times the AI managed to get the outcome they needed, was insane. I'm not gonna get into it about how RNG and coin flips work. I understand probability just fine. Something just feels wrong. Like, look at my hand here. Why do I have all Pokemon cards, and why do I keep pulling Pokemon cards? Because this was such a common occurrence, I had to limit myself to the bare bones amount of Pokemon and have the rest be energies, trainer, and item cards. And short of pulling Oak a bunch of times and trashing my hand repeatedly, I had no other way to cycle cards. And it does get irritating. There aren't many card packs that you're given right off the bat. Generations gave you a few packs to start out with, and you had different decks you could choose from. Forget that. TCG GB2 does not do free handouts. You gotta struggle, and struggle you will, because Team Great Rocket stole all the cards from everyone. And that's actually kind of an evil thing to do. They also captured all the card club leaders and their club members, so you have to fight the grunts that are holding them captive. I just want to point out that some of these trainers are being kept in water prisons, and others are being held hostage in literal cages. Those are crimes. You cannot be doing that. Additionally, the Grandmasters have been taken to a special island, and you gotta battle more grunts to free them. Honestly, battling grunts in this game sucks. I'm gonna be honest. The 6 prize card matches are the worst, especially at the beginning when there aren't a lot of cards to work with. I won so many times by default since the AI didn't have any basic Pokemon on their bench. Normally, I might have a problem with that. I'd want to play the game, but with the RNG being as bad as it was, I found it just fine. Now, this is just speculation, but I wonder if they wanted to make the game harder than the original, and so they just messed with the RNG to make it seem harder, but all they did was stack it in the favor of the AI. I don't know. You can see how much this is bothering me. Great Rocket has taken the Grandmasters to their evil island, and so you have to fight a bunch of them while you're trying to free everyone. There are 8 clubs on the main island, and then you have all the content on Great Rocket's island. And once you get to Evil Island, that's not its actual name, I came up with that. You find that you have challenges to face when you go to confront the grunts. Their little minions will give you stipulations as to what kind of cards you can use, and it was annoying. Having only one kind of energy card in your deck was a common one, and I guess that was whatever. I just used mostly colorless cards. But when they wanted you to include a certain amount of one Pokemon, I did not enjoy that. Due to the aforementioned issue of only pulling Pokemon cards, I was basically cornered if I didn't plan my deck just right. Because when I'm required to have 3 Pikachus in my deck, but their only attack is for 20 damage and they have 40 HP, that's going to be a few restarts to win. But honestly, if you can look past the frustrating AI and RNG systems, this game has a lot to offer. In terms of value, I can't say how many hours it was minus all the restarts and losses, but it was definitely over 20 hours worth of gameplay. If some of the issues could be tweaked a bit, I feel like this could be a really fun game that I would come back to. It would be even cooler to see someone make a ROM hack for it that added in cards similar to Paper Fire's mod for the original. So I think there's a lot that can be said about the early days of the TCG. The direction that it was headed is much different than it is now, but that's to be expected. Obviously, things change over time. While battling against other players has always been at the forefront of the Pokemon franchise, I think that the opportunity to test yourself and try different combinations is a great feature that the titles for the Game Boy had. Right now in TCG Pocket, you also have the option to battle against different levels of AI to test out decks and complete challenges to get rewards. But it's not really the same thing as traveling through a world with unique characters and a story to follow. Trading was also possible in the Game Boy games in the form of a feature called Card Pop, where you would be able to pop with other players by putting your Game Boys near each other. This way you could get cards that other players had that you didn't, and you would be able to fill up your card decks faster. While you might think it's common sense to have a feature like this, it was actually a deliberate design decision, and you'll see that if you read different interviews. But in a recount of a speech given by Nintendo's former president Yamauchi Hiroshi at Space World 97, he indicated that player interaction being face-to-face was a huge deal. Yamauchi believed that it was very important for players to see each other while playing video games because it would bring them together. And while it may seem kind of old-fashioned now, it shows us the greater impact video games were intended to have at one point in time. But yeah, that's something for a totally different video. We'll be here all day if I don't stop now. So I'm done yapping. I had a lot to say, but I think I got it out of my system. If you like these videos about obscure Pokemon facts, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. I've been having a blast making these videos, and I can't wait to make more. And if you are subscribed, please make sure you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified when I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching. You're amazing, and I hope you have an awesome day. Okay, bye!